Hello and welcome to episode 6 of TL Blue, your fortnightly cybersecurity news podcast focused on important cybersecurity news for Australian organisations. My name is Brad Morgan. I'm the Triskel Labs Security Operations Centre Manager. And as always today, I'm joined by Richard Granger, the Triskel Labs Global DFIR Lead. Richard, what's on the agenda for today?
Hey Brad, as usual, lots to discuss. We'll be kicking off today by talking about the leaking clouds, the Snowflake compromises.
Yeah, there's been a lot said about that, and some of it's very, very wrong from what we can see.
Yep. So we'll delve into that. A very interesting one as well is the forensics report for the Optus breach has been ruled to not be protected under privilege. So that's going to be a very interesting topic that we can discuss as well.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some implications coming out of that.
Absolutely. Australian bank account details are for sale again on the dark web.
Yeah, this one caught my eye. I mean, these are pretty common, but the volume there. So I wanted to cover that off and go into that one in a little bit of detail.
And then we will discuss a recent cyber attack for the Guardian childcare Victoria, which has been brought into the media a couple of days ago.
Yeah, that one's interesting. That, to me, that reads as a third-party breach, but we'll get into that one in a bit of detail.
We'll also be discussing Windows Recall, everyone's favorite new upcoming Windows feature, and what the implications for that could be.
Is it a forensic feature? Is it AI, or is it a keylogger? Depends what hat you're wearing, I guess, as to how you're looking at this one. But a lot of people are rubbing their hands together, I think.
Absolutely. Vulnerability this week is the Checkpoint Quantum Security Gateway's information disclosure vulnerability. Again, a perimeter device, just to keep on track with our usual perimeter device vulnerabilities of the fortnight.
Sounds nothing like consistency.
Yep. And then finally, we'll be wrapping up with a bit of discussion about what we've been seeing in the SOC and the DFIR teams over the last fortnight.
All right. Well, let's jump into it. We were just saying it's overcast today in Melbourne, so let's talk about the leaking clouds and what's been going on there.
Yeah. So, where do you want to start?
Well, yeah, I mean, I wanted to avoid this one, but I think it needs to be discussed. The initial reporting by Hudson Rock has since been removed, linking back to them saying that it was Snowflake that had been compromised. Everything I've been reading indicates to the clients of Snowflake having poorly secured accounts and people being able to get in with credentials. Which also then goes hand in hand with all of the recommendations being made by Snowflake themselves. So that's my take at the moment. But if you wanted to dig in a little bit deeper, I'm happy to.
Yeah. So like I hadn't actually been familiar with Snowflake at all until all this started happening. For those who aren't aware, it just seems like Snowflake are a very large cloud provider. So you can have your data warehouses in there, you can have your databases in there. So obviously used by a lot of large organizations as sort of there's been some discussions around, Ticketmaster were using Snowflake, and that's how potentially their data breach occurred.
And Santander is another one as well. So, and I know some of our clients use Snowflake as well. So on the production side of things. So sorry, I'll let you carry on.
Yeah, and it's sort of interesting. So Snowflake they issued a joint statement with CrowdStrike and Mandiant, basically saying that they've investigated the potential breach, and essentially there's no evidence to suggest it's an issue within Snowflake systems. It's actually to do with the Snowflake client's configuration and basically how they've set it up, not an issue with Snowflake themselves.
Yeah, which I mean is further backed up by the recommendations from Snowflake, which was enforcing multi-factor authentication on all accounts, set up network policy rules to only allow authorized users to allow traffic from trusted locations, VPNs, cloud workload, etc. And impacted organizations should reset and rotate Snowflake credentials. I mean, to me, that screams you've done a bad job at protecting your own authentication into your own environments, and we're being blamed for it.
Yeah.
Do
you think people jumped on this? Because like when I first started hearing about this, I think it was last week, people were saying this is, Snowflake's been breached. If you use Snowflake, you need to, be worried. But it sounds like it's from what everyone is reporting, it's essentially it's an issue with the end user. And we see heaps of engagements where, for example, a client uses AWS for various services, and there might be a hard-coded key in something, and a threat actor gets that. And we don't say AWS has been compromised. We don't say that with AWS. So kind of interesting why it's all of a sudden, Snowflake has been compromised when it's just end users.
Exactly. And I think some of that came from Hudson Rock. And if you read into this deeper, there is some reporting around some threat actors who there is still one out there who are claiming to have data from the back end of Snowflake. That's still to be proven. There was shiny hunters were mentioned as well. And that's since, as far as I can tell, been quite well discredited. But the interesting thing for me is reading into Charles Carmichael's post on LinkedIn recently. Now, he's the CTO of Mandiant. So having a look at this, the key takeaway out of his post for me is here are some of Mandiant's observations related to info stealers from the past few years. Since the beginning of 2020, employees and contractors working from home increasingly use their personal computers to access corporate systems.
Yep.
People often synchronize their web browsers with their work computers and personal computers. People or their children sometimes inadvertently install software laced with info-stealing malware on their personal computers. This malware can capture credentials from their web browsers. Threat actors opportunistically search for corporate credentials stolen by info-stealing malware and use them to compromise enterprises, steal data, and conduct extortion. Yeah. Now, those items were all listed in the bottom of his post about the joint statement for Snowflake, CrowdStrike, and Mandiant. That quite clearly says to me that they've got evidence somewhere of info stealers occurring.
Yep.
And that's how this is happening. We see this all the time. I mean, through our dark web monitoring for our clients, how often, and through other tools, how often do we see info stealers? Right. Thankfully, they're not client domain credentials, but we see it all the time. We search for the client domain, so we're seeing their end users having their data stolen.
Their customers,
it's not. Sorry, yes, thank you. Their customers having their data stolen because they're saving creds in browsers. If you're running an organization who develops systems, you need to stop that from being able to happen.
Yeah. Yep. Get a password manager. Don't save anything in browsers. We've seen it lead to ransomware attacks as well, where BYOD devices, someone has been accessing the RDP gateway or the RD gateway from their own machine. They downloaded, it was Redline Stealer in that particular case. And that led to their account being compromised and being used to access an internal network of an organization, eventually deploying ransomware. So it just shows how bad it could be if this kind of information gets stolen.
It does. And I mean, you touched on BYOD there, and as is Charles Carmichael in his post, I'm anti-BYOD when it comes to an endpoint device. There is no way you should be doing work on a personal computer. Mobile devices, yes, everyone needs one these days. There's no way around it. But at least an organization should have a secure enclave on that device. They should be able to track it, lock it, all that sort of thing. It's 2024. We have to be able to do that. Okay, we are going to move on to our second topic now, which is the Optus Forensics report is not protected by legal privilege. Mate, this one's, I mean, this is your world, right? Digital forensics reporting. Can you walk us through this
report
one?
writing? Yep.
That's it. It's, yeah, you don't get to do forensics anymore. You just write reports.
No, just PDF writer now. Yeah, so this is all to do with, obviously, Optus had a fairly significant data breach in terms of Australian standards in 2022, and there has been a class action lawsuit brought against them about this particular data breach. And essentially what a recent turn of events is that the forensics report that was put together as part of the response to that data breach in 2022 has been found to not be protected by legal privilege, which means that essentially that report can now be used as findings during subsequent legal proceedings, which is a sort of very interesting turn of events. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, for those of us, I've read them, but for those in our audience that haven't read a DFIR report, can you walk us through some of the content that might be in there, and I guess why the initial judgment and then the loss of this appeal is just so impactful to the industry and to Optus and this court case?
Yeah. So essentially, the digital forensics incident response report, its whole purpose is to essentially tell the story of what happened during the incident. So you'll typically have an executive summary, which is where it's what it sounds like, an executive summary about the incident, what happened. And then it's going to go into more technical details. So typically it's going to include what evidence you had access to, what you did to analyze that evidence, and then what essentially what your conclusions are based on that evidence. So it will typically run through basically, initial access into an environment, what they did whilst they're in the environment, data exfiltration, impact, things like that. And naturally, these reports are all evidence-based. So if someone had a weak password and there was RDP exposed to the internet, that will be in there if there's evidence of it.
You're going to call it out warts and all. You're not there to sugarcoat an
exactly.
incident.
Yeah, and obviously this can be quite detrimental for an organization if something was poorly configured or there's just a vulnerability that hadn't been patched for years. It's not a really good look, and it can be useful for people that are looking to take legal proceedings against them. So that's essentially why a lot of the reports that are produced as part of the response are under privilege. So that there's not going to be available for just anyone to be able to review and understand what the root causes were of an incident.
Yeah. Which I'm from what you've just said, that takes in a couple of things that were in this particular article that we're referencing. Is one of the statements that the Slater and Gordon of the law firm, they're basically seeking to demonstrate that negligence contributed to the exfiltration of customer data. And they, the report's findings may substantiate that, which is why we are going to see some of the findings from the report released. But on the flip side of that, Optus have made a statement that they are considering seeking confidentiality orders relating to elements of the report because they believe they are key to the ongoing protection of their customer data from cybercrime. So, especially if there are things in there that are very, very particular at a granular level around what their environment looks like and what controls they have in place and things like that.
Yeah.
I can see this from both sides of that coin. So
yeah,
it's going to be interesting. I don't think we'll see the full report, but I think we'll get some juicy bits out of it.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how much of it does go public. Another consideration as well is recommendations and things like that in reports as well. So we'll normally produce a separate report for recommendations about how to basically looking at everything through the lens of the incident itself. What can an organization do going forward to hopefully prevent something like this from happening again? And that might be, technology being introduced into the environment, reconfiguring things that have been sort of misconfigured in the past and things like that, a whole different raft of things. But yeah, generally those are two separate reports, so that if for some reason the forensics report about what actually happened comes out to discovery or something like that, it's not going to include recommendations. So I'm wondering if that's part of this as well, where Optus have sort of got all these things about what they want to do, or they've been recommended to do about improving their posture on certain things, and they might not necessarily want that to be discoverable and be seen by other people as well. So I kind of see it from that aspect also.
Yeah, I agree. And look, I mean, the last thing I want is for any of my clients for their security architecture and their controls to be known out in the public, because it tells an attacker exactly what they need to be doing to try and get around it. So there's going to be a lot more to watch there. What we will do though in the show notes is put in links from a couple of law firms around the initial finding in this case, because this was obviously an appeal. So the initial findings, it does go into detail around a lot of this. So if our listeners are curious around DFIR reports and if they should be privileged and that sort of thing, there's definitely some great info coming from a couple of law firms in the show notes as well. Something we haven't spoken about on this podcast is bank accounts being leaked on the dark web. There was a recent article around 18,000 Australian bank records being leaked on the dark web. Can you walk us through a little bit of this one, mate?
Yeah, so there is it's been a posting that's been made essentially that is offering the sale of Australian bank account information. I think they said it's about 18,000 lines worth of information that's contained in there, which is things like name, addresses, work phone numbers, monthly income, all sorts of little bits of information.
Employment data as well was a big one.
Yeah, employment data, length of employment, and things like that. So that's probably more on the sensitive side. I think a sort of thing that gets said quite frequently around bank account details is, what are they going to do? Put money in my account?
That's it. But when was the last time you applied for a mortgage or a personal loan? How much of that data gets used in that situation? Yeah.
So is there kind of, I guess, it'd be interesting to know where this comes from. It'll be a key thing.
It will. And reading into this a little bit deeper, there is some speculation that it has come from a real estate linked application. So, I found that one quite concerning. I'm sure we've all rented houses at one point or another, or bought houses at one point or another. And when you put the two records together, they are looking more and more like they are rental application records. So without confirming that, it got me thinking around, are there controls around real estate agents? We all know there's controls around healthcare data. There's controls around banks and that sort of thing, or regulation. But what is there around some of these other organizations that we have no option but to give massive amounts of data to? Now, I'm thinking my GP, they hold a heck of a lot of information. Most of them are small businesses. Real estate agents, when I've bought houses and rented and things like that, they hold a heck of a lot of data. Now, most of them are small businesses as well. So what's being done to try and help these organizations understand the risk that they face and also understand the importance of the data they're holding?
I think you're right with sort of real estate, especially when you're sort of applying for rentals and things like that, where you might put in a couple of applications all with different real estate agents, and you're putting all that same information, which is more than enough to someone to take your identity.
You look at it at the moment, right? They're talking about the rental crisis, and it's not unusual for people to be applying for 15 or 20 properties before they get one. So if they're with different agencies, then you're spreading your information around, and you've got no idea how it's being controlled afterward. Are these agencies going and deleting data? Yes, they have to comply with the Privacy Act, but is there anything else that's forcing them to go and delete this data if you've been unsuccessful in gaining access to that property?
I'd say no. I think if anything, we've learned anything from Medibank and Optus to great examples of where data's been held on for a very, very long period of time and it's not been deleted after. Yep. It's no longer required. So and as you said, a lot of these real estate organizations are small businesses as well. So if the big companies don't have processes in place to delete this data after it's no longer needed, I'd be surprised if the smaller organizations with the smaller IT budget to get someone to do that or have the system to do that, I'd be very surprised if they were.
I agree. And, that one is something that I think needs looking at. I know there has been conversations around cybersecurity. A quick Google search, I was able to find the REIA comments on the 2023 cybersecurity strategy discussion paper, which is hosted on the Home Affairs website. So there are conversations happening. When I read some of the responses, it took my breath away. So I'm hoping that the government is well across this one. So real estate's one of our biggest sectors in the country, and it needs some really stringent controls, I think, around cyber. Something that most of us can't avoid. Guardian has had an incident.
Yeah, so they've made a notification about a week ago saying that they've had a breach in their systems, which has resulted in some identification documents being stolen that related to the first enrollment of students in their systems. They've sort of been pretty specific in the data that's been impacted. They've said that besides that sort of first enrollment data, nothing else has been compromised. So yeah, I think you sort of mentioned at the top that is this a potentially third-party system breach? For example, if they were using a particular platform to manage the enrollment, whether that was potentially compromised, leading to that information being taken.
Yeah, because the part of that article that I latched onto was the line, we've become aware that a scanned image of the ID document you provided at the time of your visit may have been compromised by the attacker. Now, being able to be that specific, that indicates to me that that is a standalone part of their application stack, and it is something that is only used for that purpose. And it was compromised in some form to be able to get access to that data.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds like what we were discussing only a few weeks ago with Club New South Wales, how the platform out of box that was used to do the scanning was compromised, or it might have been insider threat, but essentially led to unauthorized data access. So potentially wonder if this is a similar situation.
Yeah, exactly. So it is something to be aware of. Right, you're putting your data in, and do childcare centres have to hold that much data? Do they need a full scan of your driver's license? With the advent of digital licenses coming, it's going to be easier to change those, but it's still a hassle to go through and change all of your ID documents and things like that. So I've got my Working with Children's card. It hasn't got as much detail as my driver's license. Right, so surely they'd be able to take a slightly lighter approach, I guess, to what they're taking, and I wouldn't have an issue with that. My kids have been through that process. When I visit the school, they don't take that kind of information. So, anyway, it is what it is, but it's something to keep an eye on because there might be a little bit more coming out of that one in the future. The other one we're going to talk about is everyone's new favorite tool within Microsoft Windows, depending on what hat you're wearing or what time of day it is. I'm loving the idea of this, and then I'm dreading the idea of this. So can you give us your take on this one?
Yeah. So essentially what's happening is Microsoft have announced and in the process of releasing their new feature for Windows, which is called Recall. I believe initially it's designed to be working on what they call Copilot Plus PCs. So I know that there's a bunch of new Microsoft Surface machines that are rolling out with this feature, and essentially what it does is it will take screenshots of what you're doing on your machine every few seconds and record all that information, save it all on your computer, so that if you need to recall something, you can then go into this and search for it and try and find it. Yeah, it sounds an awful lot like some kind of spyware that's, or an info steal or a keylogger.
Or all three.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the mind boggles at what this thing will be able to do. I mean, we've just discussed info stealers, right?
Yeah.
Like we've discussed, I mean, chances are that the bank records that we've spoken about are from an info stealer, right? Or from a database somewhere, but highly likely to be, correlated from info stealers. There is a possibility that the Snowflake issue is coming from info stealers. There's all these other things that we see, all of these impacts of creds in browsers getting stolen. Chromium-based browsers are the most popular browser in the world. And now we're going to go beyond that and record everything that happens on Windows.
Yeah. And that's all OCR'd. So, you're browsing something, it's all OCR'd, so you can keyword search across it. It's all available there. So if you're, I know we obviously use password managers because you got to practice what you preach.
Yes.
But I'm sure you've come across the same websites where you can't copy and paste into a particular field for the password. Like when you're first signing up, you have to manually type something out. So that's a really good situation of where, a password is being saved essentially in plain text and it's searchable across your machine. So I don't know who this is, who asked for this, I think is my takeaway. I don't.
No one.
If I want to remember something, I'll add it to a bookmark. I'll take a note about it.
There are enough ways to search your machine to find things that you've forgotten. There's history in your browser. I mean, all of your Microsoft Office applications all have the history to go right back through and look at the documents you've reviewed for. I mean, I've gone back months recently because I was looking for a document. I couldn't remember where I saved it, and I was able to find it by using the history in Excel. So there's all of that sort of things there. I don't understand the need for this. And I know I'll be turning this off for my kids. There is no way I want this happening on my kids' machines.
Yeah.
I might believe just sound old and grumpy at this point, but I don't want to.
Yeah, I can't see myself wanting to use this. I do recall reading somewhere that all browsers apart from Edge can be exempt from the screenshots being captured of it. So bad luck if you use Firefox or Chrome or something like that as well.
Yeah. I mean, I've got my team using Edge because it is so ingrained through Windows and the Microsoft stack, but might have to change that because, from our point of view, I mean, yes, we've got EDR and SIEM monitoring and all that sort of stuff on our machines, but I'm not sure how I feel about client data being captured and stored in images on my machine.
Absolutely. That kind of opens up a really interesting part of this is, let's say you work at an organization where you have heaps of client information. Let's just say you've got a database and you're reviewing all the rows in there for all the names, whatever other sensitive data, and you're just browsing through it looking for something that's all being captured by recall. It's quite worrying.
And I mean, so I look at this and they go, okay, yeah, sure, it's in a folder on the drive that users can't normally access, right? But admins can. So if you've got admin access to the machine, so you could have an admin person doing confidential work in an organization and awesome, it's saved in that user's profile. So no one else if someone else logs into that machine, they can't see it unless they're an admin. If an admin logs into that machine, then they can go and access that profile. They shouldn't have the ability to go and look at that. There's controls around what tools people can access and what level of access they have to those tools. Say an accounting platform, there is no way the sysadmin needs to have the same level of access to an accounting tool as the CFO, right? But they can go and see everything that's been happening by going down this route.
Yeah,
I hope we're blowing this out of proportion. I really, really do. But
yeah, I don't know. Like Microsoft are going and saying it's encrypted, and by that, like that means that if your machine's turned off and you got BitLocker and stuff like that, it's encrypted. But if you have, and they're saying also you need physical access to a machine, which going back to info stealers before, how hard is it going to be for someone to modify their info stealers to also capture this database, which is unencrypted while the machine is running? Don't know what to think about it. On the flip side, from a forensics point of view, this sounds fantastic. The ability to put together a really clear picture of what a threat actor has done on a machine. That's like sort of next level from a forensics point of view. From a user point of view, I would never want this. I don't know who would want this.
And I'm nervous. I mean, we spoke last week, and I gave Microsoft some praise. I also said some pretty harsh things, but we spoke about them doing their putting cybersecurity in front of everything they do. Now, I want to know if that decision was made after the decision to produce recall was made, because it takes time to build something like this.
This has probably been in the works for a while, I'd say.
Yeah, so I think they should have really stepped back and put that security lens over the top of this before they made the announcement, and asked, is this really a good idea that people are actually asking for out in the industry? What we'll do, I think we've said enough on this one, but we will put a couple of links in the show notes. There's some really good articles out here on this, and look, it's coming, and we're going to see the good or the bad out of it. So either way, I think we're all going to learn a heck of a lot more about this over the next 12 to 18 months. So
yeah, very keen to have a play with it, get it up and running, and better understanding of how it all works under the hood, I think.
Yeah, I think so. So I see some new laptops coming. What are they? Copilot Plus capable laptops.
A couple of Surface Pro purchase orders going to be put through.
That's it. I need one to know how to protect from it, and you need one to know how to use it for forensics. So awesome. The pen testers will be chasing one just to work out how to abuse it as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Look, speaking of pen testers and abusing things, let's move on to vulnerability of the fortnight. We're going to talk about Checkpoint.
Yes. So basically, what this vulnerability potentially allows to happen is for a threat actor to access a Checkpoint quantum security gateway, and then essentially be able to access or read the information that's on that particular device as well. So there's a lot of sorry, go on.
So does this mean quantum computing's already broken, or was this just a really stupid name for a program?
I think it's an old name, I would say, back when quantum computing was the thing.
That's it. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. I can't believe they called it Quantum Security Gateway, but let's move on.
Yeah, so we'll have some links to sort of go through the vulnerability in detail, but essentially it's allowing it to read any file on a vulnerable target system. So any potentially sensitive information, off the top of my head, and I'm sure the pen testers will be all over this, but reading the password and the password files on there, and potentially looking for weak password hashes to crack through the password and the shadow files. is, that's not really something that you want anyone to be able to access.
No, and it's not really that hard to crack these days either. So that is concerning. Now, there are a heap of IOCs that have been published with this, and I can say we have had a few clients that we've seen this activity scanning their checkpoint for gateways. So, and we've seen those IOCs scanning their checkpoints. So it is definitely out there. It's definitely exploited. It's been added to the CISA KEV list. If you have checkpoints out there, you need to make sure that you've taken the steps recommended. If you haven't, it's probably too late. You are probably going to be in a world of pain, and you're going to be looking for a lot of other IOCs. So again, if you're a security manager, I hope you're already across it. But if you're not, and if you're an IT admin and you know that this hasn't been actioned in your environment, please jump on it. It is definitely being exploited. We have seen an example of that in our monitored environments.
Yeah.
Thankfully, all blocked.
That's good. That's fine.
I have to be very, very careful there.
Yes. Checkpoint themselves have sort of put some articles out there saying what versions are impacted, and then they've also got hot fixes as well that can be run against them. So as Brad said, if you're running it, make sure you check that out and apply hot fixes as required.
Awesome, mate. I am going to go a little bit off script here. I've had a few people while we've been recording this send me the breaking news around MediSecure. We spoke about it before we started recording, and I've had another 3 people send it to me. So there's been breaking news today, the 5th of June in Australia, about MediSecure going into administration. I encourage everyone to read the articles on this one. Yes, they were a victim of a cyber incident. However, if we read further into it, back in November, the Australian government made a call that there was only one organisation allowed to provide e-scripts in the country, and that was ERX. So I think you'll find that, yes, the cyber incident was a contributing factor, but it was probably already going to happen. They had already ceased trading on that part of their business. So I just encourage everyone to go and read those articles before they go jumping to too many conclusions around that one. As we always do now, we're going to move on to what's been happening in the SOC and DFIR for the last week and a half or 2 weeks. We're going to do this one a little bit differently. I want to talk about a release that we're about to push out through LinkedIn. What we're looking at here is our minimum recommended conditional access policies for Microsoft Entra. So for those of you that don't know what a conditional access policy is, it is a policy that is applied to an authentication into Entra post a successful username and password combination being entered into the authentication field. It is looking at those signals around your geo-IP location. You can configure it to look at devices, to look at the IP address you're coming from, and all that sort of thing, to say if you should be allowed to access the resource that you're trying to access. The vast majority of what we see related to BECs and account takeovers and all of those sorts of things can be prevented, in my view, with strong conditional access control policy. And Rich, I beg you to tell me if I'm wrong on that one. You see more BECs than I do these days.
Yeah, I think conditional access is a really good thing to have in the toolkit to stop this stuff. Even if, using a classic example of conditional access would be geolocation restrictions. So you're an Australian organisation, users are only operating in Australia. There should be no reason for have anyone authenticating from outside of Australia. So that's a really good one. There are workarounds. So for example, let's say threat actor is successful in stealing a session token for a user. They try and log in from a VPN in America, and that gets blocked from because of the conditional access policy. That'll fire an alert, and that allows someone to go in and have a look and go, hang on a second, why is this happening? Why is there a successful authentication from a country where the user shouldn't be there, which is, really good way to basically lock something down and fix it. Threat actors can, access VPNs in Australia and then bypass that conditional access, but it's a really good early indicator.
It is, and that's one. There are others there that we can do. There are tools there that we can now identify IP addresses for known low-cost VPNs, and you can block those and that sort of thing. So, there are many recommendations. Interestingly enough, some of the more advanced features of this I've been looking at is you can destroy session tokens now with conditional access. So you can force re-authentication after a certain period of time, which I absolutely love, because a lot of what we're seeing these days is session token theft, and they're more than happy to set you up with us to work through it. I think that's the first time I've actually told clients to reference Triskel or to come to us in this podcast. I apologize. I didn't want to use it as a marketing engine, but I believe heavily in this. So that is, I think it's hopefully the first and last time I do it. Excellent. Mate, have you got anything else to throw in around that one, or anything you've seen in the last week or so?
No, nothing too exciting. Sort of the same old in the world of DFIR. I think we're still seeing a lot of BECs. Anything that organizations can do to reduce the chances of that happening, I think it's something that they should definitely look into.
Yeah, and look, that's what drove me writing this up. I was writing it for internal clients as a minimum recommendation. I thought, no, I want to share this out with the world. It's something that only took me 10 minutes to write, but it's something I don't think enough organizations are doing. I ask in interviews about conditional access policy, and most people don't know what it is. So it's still seen as something new out there at the moment. So excellent. All right. Well, thank you all for your time this week, for listening. And as always, thank you, Richard, for your time today as well.
Thanks, Brad. And thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Thanks all. Cheers.